actually did this for, I would say, a good intention. And the good intention was to try to combat Nestorianism. This is why Cyril of Alexandria is a big church, is a big saint for Egyptian Christians, especially Monophysite Egyptian Christians, because Cyril of Alexandria was so against Nestorianism. And that's why he's two saints that are, I mean, one saint that's revered in both our two traditions. But this is sort of a proof that sometimes good intentions don't lead to good results. This is sort of the need for Chalcedon. Any questions about Chalcedon?
Yes, would you repeat it all that I missed? That seems perhaps unjust.
I have a question.
Okay.
I had been taught, and I don't know if I'm hearing the same thing or I'm hearing something different, that God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, they are one and the same, and that there's an equalness. There's not God, Jesus, Holy Spirit. It's God, Holy Spirit, Jesus.
Well, we believe that as Orthodox Christians, we believe that there are three persons of the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But they're one, but they're distinct entities. And the reason why they're one is that they share, and I explain this to people, and this is, I think, was something that Father Alexander Schneemann tried to explain to people, is that the Holy Spirit, not the Holy Spirit, I'm sorry, but the Holy Trinity, they share such perfect love with each other that they act as one. That they don't go against the will of the other.
So they act as one.
They act as one. And I explained this in the last video, the last lecture. Because a lot of people will try to explain the Trinity and they'll say, well, it's like water, right? Water comes in three states. Vapor comes in a gas form, it comes in a solid form as ice, and it comes in a liquid form as liquid water. That is not the correct interpretation for the Holy Trinity, because that's modalism. Okay? Because if you freeze water, nothing changes, except nothing changes in its chemical structure. It's just the effect of temperature. The same thing with God. God is three entities, three persons, one in essence and undivided.
So the three candle analogy is not a good analogy either, where you have three separate flames that are one flame.
You could try to explain it like that. I mean, I've heard that explained. I think it's just one of those things that's difficult to explain.
Yeah, there's no catchy equation for it.
Because, and this is sort of the fight that we have with this one, is that they reject the Trinity. They say that you're practicing tritheism. You've got three gods. It's like, no, we don't have three gods. We have one God, but they're three persons. And they'll say, well, that doesn't make sense. And we'll say, no. It doesn't make sense to human logic. So, that's something that I think it's one of the mysteries of our faith, as you said. And I think it's a way that God has chosen to reveal Himself that is an expression of His perfect love. But yeah, you have to be careful with Trinitarian theology and trying to interpret it, because you don't want it to sound like it's modalism. I know when I was at seminary and we were all discussing the Trinity and dogmatics, there would be some students who would, no, that's modalism. Or, they'll try to explain it as masks. Like God puts on different masks. And that's modalism. But we say that God is three. And they share one essence together. Out of perfect love. That makes sense. I know it doesn't make sense, but it's something that...
Well, it does, because two become one when they're married and they're perfectly in love.
Well, and that's something that I try to explain in marriage as well, is that in marriage, who do you give your will to? You give your will to your spouse, right? It's the same in monasticism. In monasticism, you give your will to your abbot. It's the same in marriage, you give your will to each other. The thing is that with the Trinity, they've given their wills to each other. Like when Christ, I mean, the example of Christ, and that's what we'll get into in a minute when we talk about monothelitism, is that Christ, when he's talking to his Father in the garden before his passion, what does he say? He says, I don't want to do this. Dad, I don't want to do this. This scares me. But, and it's something that's amazing because these are words that his mother parrots. Or rather, he's parroting it from his mother when the Annunciation happened. Not my will, but your will. So, again, that's, I mean, that's a perfect example of giving your will up. Okay. Any other questions? The Second Ecumenical Council at Constantinople, which is the Sixth Council. And that was in 553, and that was again a condemnation of New Arian and Monophysite Nestorian writings. I won't go into that too much. I believe it was also the one that talked about Origen, correct?
I'm not sure.
I believe it was. And we'll get into Origen later when we start talking about Orthodox salvation. There was a theory that he proposed called apokatastasis, which means that at the end of time, everyone will be saved.
Including the devil.
Including the devil. And so we'll talk about what that means when we get into Orthodox views of salvation. No, that was the Fifth. The Sixth Ecumenical Council was the third council of Constantinople, and that repudiated monothelitism. Any Greek scholars here?
Yeah, I know that means one will.
Right, one will. Thelema. Thelema meaning will. Okay.
I think this is my personal heresy.
This is your personal heresy?
When I sit in the kitchen doing dishes and I try to figure out how many wills Christ has, I miss it every time.
Well, he just named my personal heresy, which is his origins.
We'll talk about Origen's heresy later. Because there's a way to modify it. Gregory of Nyssa modified it. We'll talk about that later, though. Monothelitism teaches that Christ only had one will. Okay, that was a divine will. How is this a problem? Again, it goes back to Monophysitism.
It was an effort by the Emperor Heraclius to come up with a compromise with the Monophysites.
Correct. And the problem with monothelitism is that it's not scripturally evident that Christ had just a divine will. Why?
Because he says, not my will, but thine.
But thine,
That
okay.
surely implies two.
Right, so Christ experiences human fear.
Right.
When he's about to go to his passion, he experiences human will. He experiences that on the cross. When he asks God the ultimate human question of the human experience, why have you forsaken me? And so it's pretty evident that Christ also had a human will as well. So this was repudiated, and Christ, as it was taught, or as it was repudiated at Ephesus, with Chalcedon, with Monophysitism, Christ has two wills. Divine and human.
And does that link back to the the fact that he has two natures, and somehow the will is
It was
together with the nature.
Correct, it was
If there is a nature,
emphasized.
that nature has a particular will. If there's a different nature, that different nature has a different will.
right.
of some
It,
sort.
it couldn't be that complete nature if it didn't have a will.
Because I don't know if, I mean, if Christ had a new nature, which was just sort of an intermingling of everything, what would that will be? I don't, it's schizophrenic? I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like it would choose between human and divine. And
Right.
go.
So that is monothelitism. That council was 680 to 681. The reason why there was a gap, because I think it was done late in the year, so they had to keep it going into the new year. Okay. The next one is a big one that I want to spend some time on, and that is the last ecumenical council that we accept, the seventh. And it's the second council at Nicaea. A little bit more in depth and maybe get some discussion going is because I think that it's a heresy that's very evident today in a lot of churches, and people don't know it. And I think that it's even evident in a lot of churches that have liturgical practice, and that is iconoclasm. What is iconoclasm?
Iconoclasm is, it has to do with not being able to show images of Christ or divine images or
So
something.
you can't show there are essentially no images in church. Okay. There were debates among iconoclasts as to what was the best image that you could use that was acceptable. They said that the Eucharist was the best example. There was that. And in a lot of churches, and you see this sometimes in Greece, if they were built during the iconoclastic era, where the platytera usually is, over the altar, there's usually two symbols. One of two. Usually it's just this, cross, or sometimes a lamb. And they said it was acceptable to, if you wanted to depict Christ, to depict him as a lamb. Now, this is a big heresy, I think, for a lot of Protestants because a lot of people will cite that it's idolatry to depict Christ in an icon. It's idolatry to depict icons of saints and such.
They just totally don't understand what icons are.
Well, I think the big question is what is, and this is a good discussion to bring up, what is idolatry? And how does it differ from icon veneration?
I mean, idolatry, you're worshiping
The actual image, yes. You're worshiping the actual image, and that's what idolatry is. Best example of idolatry is the golden calf out of Exodus. The Israelis took the spoils, which were essentially slave reparations, out of Egypt. And they took that gold out of Egypt and they were supposed to build the ark with it. And they didn't. They melted it down and they made a calf out of it to worship. And so what did Moses do? Do you remember?
Wrote the tablets of the law.
Yes.
Yeah, he threw the commandments out at it, broke it, ground it up, and put all the gold powder into the water and made the people drink it so that they couldn't get it back. But I like to emphasize that there's a difference between idolatry and icons. Okay? They're two different things. Idolatry teaches that the representation or whatnot of that image is worshipped. That is the object of worship. Okay? Whereas with the icon, it's what the icon represents, or it's what we would say it's what the icon, what's behind the icon would say.
You're kind of praying through it, not.
Right. So, and I always, and this sort of bothers Protestants when I ask them this, if icons are sinful, then why did God command the Israelites to make an ark and put cherubim around it? Why did he command them to do all sorts of things with images for their liturgical temple worship? Because the temple worship was pretty heavy and laden with images.
There were bulls on the big
Bulls on the big
basins.
the big basin, and pomegranates on the priest's vestments, and I mean it's liturgically colorful. Would have been a marvel to see, I think. So there's a difference. But the main difference, and the reason why this is so important to Orthodox Christians, is that if you cannot do an icon of Christ here. Give me the icon of the Theotokos right there with Christ. There you go. Here's from the gift shop, okay? If you can't, the reason why it's okay to depict Christ like this is because Christ shares in our humanity.
He walked around and people saw him.
He walked around, people saw him.
If there'd been photography, they could have taken his picture.
They could have taken his picture. He ate. He drank water. He got tired. He got thirsty. He felt joy. He worked out in the sun. He cried. I'm pretty sure maybe he had acne as a kid. I don't know. But there are two reasons why it's okay to depict Christ in an icon. One is that Christ shares in our humanity. Okay? And therefore, an icon is a reminder of that incarnational theology. It's a reminder of Christ's incarnation. He became human for our sakes. And the second is that matter is ultimately good. God made matter. Matter is a good thing. And so it's good to take something that's made out of wood and put an image on it. It's good to use frankincense and olive oil and water and all these things that God made for us in liturgical worship. Okay? But it's mostly, again, that incarnation theology that is really important.
I think I hadn't adequately thought about that second one, about matter, because really when my Protestant family that I grew up in talked about those things, there was a tremendous contrast between spirit and matter. And one of the things that was sought in worship was to make it spiritual. And that meant basically never incarnating it, never incarnating worship in things. And that, of course, is against the whole doctrine of the incarnation.
Correct. And I think that what we do is, and this, maybe it's a symptom of the modern era, it's very Platonic. It's a lot of Platonism going on, where we'll try to find the spiritual by reducing the physical, which, I mean, that's not the case.
I saw a church, a Calvinist church in the Netherlands, that to me, if I'd photographed it, it would be the proof of why you don't reject icons. This was it had originally been a Catholic church, but they had the communion table, as they would have called it, in the middle, and the seats around it. But back where the altar at one time had been was an enormous Baroque construction with angels and figures of all kinds and all kinds of ornament overwhelming the church. And it was the tomb of one of the princes of Orange. That was okay.
Right.
But God doesn't get it. God gets the plain communion table.
Yes.
Prince of Orange gets the enormous Baroque structure.
ornate thing.
It's like replicating the Herod and the aristocracy got everything, and Jesus got nothing.
There's no place for the Son of Man to lay his head.
Yes.
Yeah.
That really, you could put that as the caption underneath the picture of that
Right.
church.
You know, and I think one of the things that, and again, this can be something that we get into when we talk about the liturgical worship, is that I think a lot of people are overwhelmed when they come into an Orthodox church for the first time. And one of the first things that hit me when I became Orthodox was the smell of the incense, which is almost something that we never really see with even Protestant services, and you don't really see anymore in Catholic services either, because they've taken out incense. And I think, you know, it's sort of that sterilization. Orthodox Christianity to me is probably least sterile.
Yeah, it engages every one of our
It
senses.
engages all the senses, and I think it's emphasizing that matter is good, and again that our senses have been deified by Christ. I mean, one of the traditions that I like of the Jewish tradition that we sort of share in the smells is that when the Sabbath ends, in Judaism they'll pass around it's a box, and inside the box is spices. For the Ashkenazi, it's usually cloves. For Sephardic Jews, it's usually aromatic spices of some kind. And they do this at the end of the Sabbath to remind them that as the week goes by, it's sort of longing for the next Sabbath, that the next Sabbath is sweet. And it's something that we sort of share, with our incense, in that Orthodoxy teaches that incense is prayers that are rising up to heaven, but also reminds me that the worship of God is sweet. So in that, and also when I was talking to an Orthodox rabbi about this, and he says scientifically it's been proven. What's the scent that, I mean, what's the sense that's most connected to memory? Smell.
And it's scriptural too, right?
Right, and it's scripture. So, I mean, the first thing that, when the smell hits you, it's supposed to jog your memory and sort of get you in this mode where, okay, now I'm stepping out of the mundane into the sacred, and I've entered the sacred space.
I've definitely noticed that the first time you sense, the church when you walk down, it's like a little switch goes off.
Right.
It's hard to explain.
Then there was an article that was recently published that incense is now, it's a natural antidepressant, frankincense is.
Really? It's an antiseptic too.
Yeah, when he posted it on
Yeah, I did.
Facebook, yeah, and I read I thought it was very interesting, so now I'm gonna be using a lot of frankincense.
So I
Yeah,
burned it in my house.
Books on essential oils, and frankincense is supposed to be cleansing, but myrrh is supposed to be lifting to prayers to heaven.
Right.
They're talking about myrrh.
Myrrh was associated with the dead, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a burial.
As well.
Put on in burial.
But the in the temple they used a specific mixture of incense that I don't think that, I mean, people have tried to replicate it, and I think that the recipes that's involved would be very expensive to make. And in fact, in Jewish tradition, one Levite family was responsible for producing it.
Wow.
It's like really expensive. I even think it's got mother of pearl in it or something. I don't know, I have to go back and read, but it's fairly expensive.
Well, you only need enough for one temple.
Right, but then again, the temple has continuous worship going all throughout the day.
Right.
I mean, you've got priests keeping watch and things like that, so I don't know how much incense would have been used. Any other questions? That leaves us with finishing the ecumenical councils, and next time we'll talk about the Great Schism and the reason why the Great Schism happened, and from there we'll go into Orthodox soteriology. What do we think about salvation? How are we saved? And Christ's involvement in our salvation.
لست أقول سرك لآخر